There's grumblings within the church. There's division within the church.
Amanda's having nightmares.
Yes. There's talks of putting things up to a vote. There's all sorts of things. And in the midst of that, we lose a very key player in the church.
Yeah. It's like, and it's one of those people that like, there's like people that come and go throughout the years. And we've talked about that, but there is like, when you say key player, like something big has to happen. Like, I don't know. It's crazy. I just watched the Barbie movie again the other day. Because
Great
why not?
movie.
Right?
Yes,
Love
I
that
know.
movie. And you know, like at the end where like the Barbies have all been brainwashed and then the lady goes on a rant and they like wake up and they're like, whoa, like I feel like this is what happens. Like
Yes.
people wake up and then they're like, oh, and then they leave the church. That's what happens.
I don't want to touch a foot. No, you don't.
No, you don't. Faith can feel like hearts and butterflies until someone lights a match and burns it all to the ground. Welcome to the Burning Butterflies podcast.
The sad thing is that there's abuse of every kind within the church. But the spiritual abuse is the stuff that just
What's a place there shouldn't be abuse? Like there just shouldn't be abuse in a place that claims to.
Well, it ruins your soul. If you're new here, we suggest listening to our prologue episode first. This is the story of two women's journey through toxic church culture and spiritual abuse, all while finding healing in the end.
Sometimes it's just the facts, and if you get offended by it, that's a you issue. And if we can't be mature enough to have these conversations, even if some of the topics are difficult, then shame on us.
So we have discussed Beth Moore. We have discussed her, she was at the church, man, as long as I was. And she's one of the people, like, even when I left, I had people who said, when this person left, I thought there was a problem. When this person left, I thought there was a problem. But it was really like when the people who were all in left, then that caused other people, even people who weren't as invested, weren't drinking the Kool-Aid as much, it caused them to look and be like, whoa, maybe there's a problem. And, someone said, someone told me, like, when you left the church, that's what it did for me. And I feel like when Beth Moore left, this caused a lot of people to really start being like, whoa, wait, what is going on here? So around the time of the banquet, Beth Moore, the things this family went through, like, before we even get into this, I really just want everyone to like stop and like just really put yourself in this position. You come from a church that was very high control, very toxic. You think you find spiritual freedom and solace in Come As You Are. It is something new for you, and you feel like you're finding healing. You're getting involved, but then Tom finds out how much money you actually make. And so you're constantly being asked to help donate money for this, or, can you pay for new flooring in the church? Can you pay for this? Can you pay for that? We're doing the big summer park event. Surely Beth Moore and her family are going to pay for this and this. we're doing this for Christmas. Beth Moore will pay for this. And so you have all of this, and then you lose your son and his wife in a very horrific and sudden way. And instead of being surrounded by people who love you and support you, you are pressured to turn this into a God's got it. There's always a plan and a purpose. And you're not given the time to truly grieve and heal that you need. And you're being pushed back into ministry so quickly that, just a few months after losing your son and his wife, you and your teenage daughter are speaking at a women's retreat, telling other women how it is well with your soul.
Yeah. I feel like there's like a few key things to like this whole situation that it is just like almost textbook. Number one, these types of organizations prey upon people who are dysregulated in some way, shape, or form. So whether that's like codependent families, alcohol abuse, people who are coming out of like the so many times that new people would show up at church because they had just gone through a major loss, either a parent, a child, a spouse.
You lose a job,
Yeah, and that situation puts you in a dysregulated state. And so, of course, you're searching for answers. And churches are one of the places that people naturally gravitate to, to find answers. And then on top of that, you have like, if you belonged to any other group or organization, or even think of like your workplace and whatever, like there are reasonable responses that are like, hey, take the time you need, do what you got to do. Are you getting help? Like there's structures and decencies in place. I think about when my dad passed away and I was employed, and the help that I was offered and the resources that were offered to me, because this is what happens when you belong to a community of people, and if you were on one extreme, let's just say you were coaching like a kids basketball team and you belong to like a club basketball team and you belong to this organization, this organization would be like, hey, take the time you need, do what you got to do. We're going to make other arrangements. We're going to help get you through, right? We're going to stand by you.
Yeah.
But that kids basketball organization isn't also telling you they're the ones with the answer, Like we don't expect them to be like, hey, we're going to help you. We're going to get you counseling. We're going to, you expect a certain level of help from them. But when it comes to a church, especially a church that has been feeding you this propaganda of Jesus is the way, everything we do is about Jesus, and this is where you're going to find your life. This is where you're going to find all your answers. Like we are here because we are the answer. When tragedy happens like this, it's like you're looking to this church to be the answer.
Yeah.
And, we talked about this before where there are churches that have plans and structures in place on how they will help connect people to the resources that they need, right? I think that's healthy. I think that everybody should do a church check and, right now, if you've never done it, and find out what your church's procedures are for when these types of tragedies happen.
Yeah.
Right? Like what is your answer going to be?
And if the answer is, we will counsel you, we will help you, we are the only ones who will be intervening on your behalf.
Yeah.
That's a red flag.
Yeah. And your next question should be like, okay, what degrees and certificates and experience do you have that?
Yeah.
Right. Because no, I'm sorry. Like, that's another thing. like, like, just because somebody's title says pastor, like, you really need to do the investigating yourself. Like, and so that's where I feel like the biggest disservice done, especially in this situation, but in so many situations, is that because you're convinced that this is how God operates through his church, God operates through his people and through the Bible. So all you need is this church people and your Bible, and everything's going to be okay. That's fine when I'm stressed about, paying a bill. But when we're talking about tragedies that are like horrific tragedies that need professional people to step in and do, you need time and you need help. Like, it's a complete disservice. And that's part of the spiritual abuse tactic that you fall into in these organizations. So yeah, like this poor family, right, that has already been preyed upon because of other situations that they have going on as far as being like dysregulated, but like also how awful is it that the people that said they were going to help were not in any way, shape, or form able to help and did more harm than good to this family.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like, other stuff had happened along the way. Like, there was a time where she had an accident at the church and there was a door that just would slam shut so hard. And she was putting some stuff away and this door slammed shut on her fingers. And I mean, like, gnarly. Like, it's not like, oh, you shut your finger in a door, ow, that hurt. Like, I mean, we're talking it like pulled the skin off the bone and basically like filleted her finger.
Mm-hmm.
And she asked for like, I don't know if you would call it workman's comp, but basically she asked like, hey, I was volunteering here. Like, this was a fairly big accident. Can you help me, with this? And the attitude she got was, first of all, you make enough money. Why are you asking the church to pay for this? And second of all, we don't do that. You don't do that to your church family. Look what you're going to do. You're going to cause our insurance to raise. Like, what are you doing? You don't do that to us.
Yeah.
And, her husband who, struggled with his stuff. I mean, you look at someone like Froggy who walks away from his family, who goes on this little excursion, is doing God knows what with who knows what. And you have to physically go get him and beg him to come home. And we give him a spot on the worship team and allow him to start a ministry and star in a play.
Yeah, and work with youth kids.
Yeah. And teach lessons to the children's ministry. Beth Moore's husband was doing baptisms. And I mean, that's the reason why, he had a moment where he was struggling and Justin was asked to fill in for him. And he never got that, that position back. There was no redemption for him.
No.
So you have these issues that are going on for years, right?
And you know what I think is funny about all of that? This is like just a light bulb moment, is that Tom would be so against groups like Celebrate Recovery, like we've talked about that, because people just sit around and ruminate. This is what these are his words, not my opinion. This is my understanding of how it was presented to me by Tom himself.
Yes.
People just sit around and ruminate and just continually keep themselves in this place because they're always talking about it and they're always focused on it. They're never like, you're recovered, get over it, right? Like, that would be his dissertation on that. But yet that's exactly what you described, how he would treat people. Like, you were never redeemed. I was always flaky, and God forbid if I volunteered for anything, because I might just not show up, and you were always bossy, and
Yep.
and Beth Moore's husband was always, a drunk, and it's horrible. You know what I mean? Like, and that's not the case. Like, I worked with these people, and, people struggle with things. We all
Yeah.
struggle with things. Let's just be real. Like, people struggle with things in this world. And to present yourself as an organization that's helping when you're actually harming, and shame on them. And then I'm just going to reiterate, because, buyer beware. Like, you really have to we have a responsibility, even with churches. Like, we put in more research into finding the silliest things in this life, but don't research the church we're going to.
Yeah.
We just assume because it's a church, because they use the name Jesus, and because, the people are called pastors, that means something. And it just doesn't. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
But let's get into all the juicy details of more. I'll go on a that's another podcast. I'll go on dissertations at this. You're going to be like, Melissa, I'll be like, I'm sorry, I have opinions.
No, exactly. All of that is so true, that so many people were never allowed to move past anything, but yet we could never hold Tom or a small select group of people accountable for anything that they ever did.
Right.
And so I'm not exactly sure what went down. All I know is that I went to work one day, and Tom said, Beth Moore is coming in to have a meeting. I need a woman in the room. He had done this to me a handful of times, where someone would come in and want to have a meeting, which I always thought was a little weird, because I would go in his office and we would shut the door and I would get screamed at, and no other woman ever had to be in the room for me.
Interesting. Yeah, I never thought about that. That's weird.
And, I know he would do the same thing to Brandy. Like,
yeah.
And so now, hindsight 2020, I really do feel like it was another woman had to be in the room when it was convenient for him, and he needed
like
to
a
have
witness.
A witness to what he was going to say.
Yeah. No, and it's so funny, because those two thoughts, isolated and separate, like, because you just blew my mind again with that. Like, those two thoughts, isolated and separate, which was our journey and how people get manipulated upon in these organizations. The information is isolated. The information is separated. You aren't put in situations where you could put pieces together. That's part of what keeps you in these systems. And those two facts, like, to me, it's never been, up until this moment, it has never been weird to me that he would ask to have another woman in the room when talking to a woman. Like, that is a well-known philosophy among, like, I mean, even with working with kids, like, you don't ever want to put yourself in a situation where you could be, as a leader or anything, accused of something by being in a one-on-one conversation with somebody of the opposite sex or a child, right? And so that it makes complete sense to me that, yeah, especially in church culture where men are like, or women are taught, don't be alone in a room with a man. I shouldn't say men are taught that. Women are taught.
Yeah.
Don't put yourself in a situation where you're alone. But that's common. Like, it's a common practice. So to me, that's never been weird. And then on the isolated other thought, like, yeah, I know that you were in the office with Tom alone a lot. And so was Brandy. This is the first time those two thoughts have converged. Like, mind blow it. But this is an example of how you get manipulated, how you get preyed upon. Isolated and separated information, so you never put it together. Like, that's That's crazy. Okay, go ahead. I'm like, I'm so invested.
So he says I have to come in and sit in this meeting, right? And so I really was like, okay, whatever. And she comes in and I walk her back and then I go in and I walk in the office behind her. I shut the door and then I go sit in the corner. So in Tom's office, he has like his U-shaped desk that he sits in the U part. And then on one of the arms of the U, it runs along the wall, right? But then the other one kind of jets out into the middle of the room. And so he sits on one side and then there's chairs for someone to sit directly across the desk from him. And then he has a couple of chairs in the corner. And so I sit in the corner, and essentially my job in situations like this is I just sit there as like you said, like a witness. Like I just sit and listen. I do not have input. I do not have opinion. Most of the time I would just sit and stare at the floor because I didn't want people to feel like uncomfortable that I was sitting there like, watching them have a conversation with Tom. And I do have to say, like, there was a couple times where, like, someone had to go talk to Tom, and they asked me to go with them. Tom did as so, like, the tamale lady, she asked me to go with her. Um, but in instances where Tom asked me in, um, all of those instances are when people were mad at him. And so he was coming at it and he was always every time I was in the room, he was very understanding, he was very gentle. He was the Tom you got on a Sunday morning behind the pulpit. And what can we do to come alongside of you? I'm so sorry you feel this way. Those types of things. So I just sit in the corner and kind of look at the floor, and Tom's like, Amanda's going to be in here as another woman in the room. And I could tell she was a little like uncomfortable with it, but I think she accepted it because one of the issues that we had been having was there was a man at the church that what several women, not just Beth Moore, but several women had come forward and said that they felt uncomfortable with the way he was hugging.
Yeah.
They felt like he was hugging too. I mean, if you're
No,
in a
I forbid
if you're
my daughters to get in close range of this man.
yeah,
Like I instructed them, if he says hi, say hi and get away as fast as possible so he cannot give you a hug. Like
yeah.
that's
And
yeah.
if you're in a purity culture driven environment for any amount of time, side hugs are a thing.
Yeah. And I
You
avoided this man like
yeah,
like the plague because of his behavior. So yeah.
yeah. And so he would front hug, but then he would front hug and like it almost felt like he was like nestling his body into your boobs.
Mm-hmm.
And it made a lot of women very, very uncomfortable. And so I'm not a big hugger. And so I never and keep in mind, I everyone's like, Amanda's mean, so it's not like I had people coming up like, "Oh, we love Amanda," like wanting to hug me. Uh, because, yeah, it just, so, I mean, when I was asked about it, I was like, honestly, like, I don't know if I do hug him.
Right.
Like, I really don't hug anyone.
No,
I
right.
hugged,
Yeah,
like,
it was
honestly,
creepy.
like,
It-
I hugged Twyla, but that's Twyla would kiss people,
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
on the cheek.
You
Like,
had no choice. She was hugging
yeah,
you whether you liked it or not.
yeah. So, I hugged Twyla, but, I mean, like, I didn't hug other people,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so but this guy did creep a lot of women out, and several women came forward
Yeah.
with, this, like, accusation of, "Can someone just talk to him,
Yeah.
please?"
And I mean, because honestly, it's like my opinion then is was slightly skewed in the direction of he's a sweet, like you're like, oh, he's just a sweet old man. He doesn't know any better, right?
Yeah.
And you try to give him the benefit of the doubt. And so the attitude was, yeah, go talk to this guy and say, hey, look, like, we don't think you're meaning to be creepy, but it's coming off that way. So could you tone it down a little bit? Like, enough people are saying something that, and my opinion now is skewed towards, hey, when in doubt, like, they're messed up. Like, he's a creep.
Yeah.
It's him. He is a creep. No excuses.
Exactly. That had been going, and Beth Moore was one of the women who had come forward and said, "This is really bothering me."
Yeah. And I do feel, before you keep going, because like, to get to the point where she had this meeting with Tom, my understanding in the way that, because I worked with them, I was friends, Beth Moore and I were friends, and like, I was friends with the daughter, like, I spent a lot of time with them, and we had a lot of communication being on the worship team together, whatever, which we can get into after you tell this part of the story. But um it's like her going through that extreme tragedy almost had the reverse effect of what leads you into churches. Like, you really start questioning things. And so I think she was going through this process of questioning things. And then all of a sudden, a lot of the red flags became really red for her. Because I've had a
Yeah.
lot of conversations with her. And so I believe, like, she started on a journey of questioning, and that she started to connect some dots. So it doesn't surprise me. I just say that to say it doesn't surprise me that she ended up in a meeting with Tom, because I know that there had been email communication going back and forth up to this, that she had started to question things directly to Tom. So to me, I know that this meeting wasn't like it wasn't just all of a sudden, oh, we're just going to have a meeting. Like, I feel like it had been long enough. She had done enough digging. She had known a lot of things and started to put pieces together. And so she started questioning, like, almost everything, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like, in that meeting, like, because he was like, "Amanda's gonna be another woman in the room because you requested a closed door meeting." It was like she was like, "That's weird," because she has had closed door meetings with him alone.
Yeah.
Um, but then it was almost like, well, she accepted it, and I think part of the reason why she accepted it was because of what had been going on with this guy.
Yeah.
And in that meeting, I I don't know if she came in to have one conversation, and because I was in the room, it she wasn't comfortable enough saying things, like saying
Yeah.
certain things to Tom, like
That's entirely possible. Yeah.
confronting him with certain things. But it was very much like, I need to take a step back. I can no longer be in ministry.
Hmm.
Tom pressured her to stay in ministry. And finally, it was like, well, I need to step out of ministry for my husband. And even then, I felt like it was an excuse. Like, I felt like she needed to be done with ministry, and Tom wouldn't let it go. And so
She
she was
found the
like,
excuse he couldn't argue with.
yeah, I have to honor my husband, and, like, all of this stuff, right? So he, is like, we're going to do whatever we can to help you out. She had been serving in the sound booth, and was like the lead of that ministry. And he's like, it's fine. You take all the time you need. If you are ready to come back, you just let us know. But, we'll find someone to kind of like take your place. You take however much time you need to, basically get your house right. Right. And that meeting ended. And it was very much like, I remember walking out of that room and being like, wow, he was very compassionate. all of this stuff, maybe Young Gun is rubbing off on him a little bit, and he is learning, compassion and empathy and all of these things. So that was a great meeting. Good job, Tom, is what, like, in my brain.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, right? Then fast forward a couple days, and Beth Moore sends an email to anyone who is leading anything. Like, so any leader in the church, the pastors, a bunch of leaders, and essentially it like calls Tom out for narcissistic stuff, calls Tom out for a bunch of stuff, and says, I'm done. And you, in the last meeting I had with you, you yelled at me, you said these things to me, you berated me, you abused me, and I'm not putting up with it anymore. And so Tom prints the email out. And he has it because in his excuse was that she sent it to multiple people. So therefore she doesn't care who knows. And so he prints it out and he starts taking it and showing it to people. People who did not receive the email. Tom hands them a printed copy. And he puts them on the spot, and in front of him, read this. What do you think of this? So even if you agree with some part of that email, are you really going to stand there and be like, I think she has a valid point? When he shoves papers in your face, blindsides you in the middle of the lobby on a Sunday morning, or at worship practice, or, all of these different places, are you really going to push the envelope in those moments? Probably not. So he brings me the printout and he said, did you see this? And I was not on the email. So I said, no, I did not. So I read it and I am very confused. And he looks at me and he says, did I say any of those things that she's accusing me of in that meeting? You were there. You sat in the corner. Did I say any of that? And I was like, no. Like, I thought that meeting went great. I thought you were very kind and compassionate.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, she's crazy. She's crazy. She has lost it. She's just crazy.
Yep. Which, is par for the course of, like, when somebody gets in a disagreement with Tom and they leave, the narrative is they're crazy. There's something wrong with them. They're pursuing the wrong things. Look, it finally got them. They said they were okay. They're not, like, whatever. It's always their fault. And for some reason, like, they have leprosy. You can't go near them. Like,
yeah. And I just remember being, like, so confused. Like, I don't understand where she got this from. I don't understand why she would say this. That's not anywhere close to what was, said in the meeting. I don't understand. And it wasn't until you and I had lunch with her
when we started recording this podcast.
Yeah, about a year ago. She started listening to the podcast that we met for lunch, and, like, I asked her about it, and she's like, because he called me back in. So he called me in there to sit and be a witness to him being kind and compassionate and wearing a mask of what a good pastor should look like. And then, after everyone was done with work that day, after everyone had left, he calls her back in for a private meeting that all of a sudden, oh, we don't have to have another woman in the room. It's fine if you and I meet in the office at nighttime when there's no one else around, when, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Because if I remember correctly, like, I think 100% she had a different agenda, and that's why he called you in. Because I'm as I'm thinking about this, I remember her being like on a mission. Because then that woman gets on a I love this woman. She keeps receipts.
Oh, yeah.
Like, she's just amazing in that way. I'm
Mhm.
like, but I really do believe that, like, she was going in there. Yes, her intention was to step down from ministry, but I don't think that meeting originally would have been as nice and flowery and just like, hey, I can't do ministry. I need to be at home more because he's struggling. And I'm not struggling, but he's struggling. So I have to be home with him. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like she really went in to be like, look, we're done. And this is why we're done. And I think all the things that were in the email, she wanted to say in person, but then you were there.
Yeah.
And so that meeting went different. And then, of course, Tom knew that. He totally knew that. He was prepared for that. So he calls you in. That was his strategy. And then, yeah, it's like, okay, now let's really have a conversation about this where nobody's a witness to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need a witness for you to be kind and compassionate.
Yeah.
And then
To show that she's crazy because, I mean,
yeah.
obviously she hasn't dealt with anything.
Well,
No,
because
she
then
hasn't because you forced her into a situation to pretend like everything was okay.
well, so you have Pastor Unreliable who is like, "Oh, we're gonna get to the bottom of this," right? So he calls a special meeting, and so, like, Pastor Unreliable and Bill Nye the Color Guy and, like, just a couple other random guys that are, like, quote, unquote, "leaders of the church," right? Um, and Tom and they all come in and they have a meeting in the, like, living room area of the office. And Tom even calls me in to that meeting with those men
Yeah.
and
To
are
vouch for his
like,
character.
"Yeah, it's like, you were there. Did I say any of these things? Like, you were there. You were in the room,
Yeah.
and I had to give an account in front of these people."
Yeah. Wrong meeting, Tom.
And I like, when she was like, "There was a second meeting, he called me back in," I was like, "Son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Like, you've gotta be kidding me."
Yeah. There's
But
the Tom we know.
now it all makes sense.
That makes
Now it
sense.
all makes
Yeah.
sense. So she sends this email, and he's like, "Well, she's done. She's done serving. Amanda, we're gonna put you up there in charge of the sound booth." Now, you have been a part of worship,
Yeah.
right? And I my interaction and my experience with anything to do in the sound booth at all was I would have to go up there, and like a little kid in children's ministry was crying, we had like little numbers, right, on their name tags, and the parents had the same number. So if a kid was crying, I have to go up there and they would like put the number up in the corner on the screen to tell that parent, like, "Hey, come get your kid," right? So I would go up there and I would do that. And I did work with Beth Moore on like the streaming, and we had started putting our sermons out there um like on YouTube and stuff like that. So, I did work with her on that. And then like I would make a bunch of slides and stuff. So I would just go up there and check and make sure, like, "Hey, is everything compatible? Do you need anything? Like, is that video working well?" Things like that. That is the extent of my knowledge of how that booth ran. So what exactly did Beth Moore do? Because I was put in charge of something I had no damn business being in charge of. So
Yeah.
just
She did
what
everything. This woman, she like researched and learned, and she loved all of this audio visual technical stuff, the music side, the soundboard, like how it all works, and all of it. So she was in charge of like the entire sound booth, from sound mixing to sound, like how the sound booth was set up, she did her homework. Like if we needed something, she would research and figure out the best way that we could make it happen for our setup. Like she knew every in and out of it. Um, and she funded like the majority of it to my understanding. Like if we needed
Yeah.
something, I mean, she was the go-to.
Yeah.
She troubleshooted like all of the like if there was ever an issue, because you're talking about like you got a church building that was built with one type of sound equipment, sound system, and then you know in 10 years that stuff's all, I mean, within years it's outdated, not even 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, technology and where we've come with sound equipment and audio visual stuff and just it multiplies.
It
This isn't an addition, this
yeah.
is multiplication.
It was built with like, like in the back of your old TV, you have like the white, yellow, and
The
red plug-in,
RCA.
the RCA cables. Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's what she did. Is she wanted to do that. She had a desire to do it. She had the passion to do it, and she got herself the skills and the know-how to do it. And she did. She ran it like a boss. So, um, that's what she did.
So
And then Amanda, who's like, yes, I'll help with the slides.
and so she had a working knowledge of what good music sounded like, of what having the right volume and
Yeah. Of like, so
like
here's the thing with sound. Like I did sound for years, and the church had been through a couple of sound people that were actual like sound technicians. When I first started coming to Come As You Are, I had been doing sound in another church, and I had become friends with a gentleman there who used to do sound at Come As You Are. And he was a legit actual sound technician, like professionally. And I met him, and he mentored me through some stuff and really got me going in the right direction and helped me hone in my skill a lot as a sound person. And then he ended up coming back to Come As You Are. And while he was there, he helped transition the Come As You Are like sound system through some transitions into getting caught up to where it needed to be. But as a sound person, the venue, the acoustics in the venue, the equipment, like everything has its own special tweaking that needs to go on. Like there's a general consensus of like, I've met a lot of sound people who like travel and do sound in different venues, that I've talked to them. And talk shop just to get an idea of like what were your feelings in this room with like the acoustics and stuff. Because you notice things once I always notice the background stuff. I was a stage tech. I love all that stuff. So I go to theater and I'm like, did you see this? People are like, I was watching the show. Why are you watching them move the sets? And I'm like, because did you see how they did that? It was so cool. Couldn't tell you what the actor was wearing, but I know how they moved the set. Like, but so like I've had a lot of conversations, and like, yeah, there's a general understanding of how things work, but every venue and every event lends itself to its own. You learn something every time you go somewhere. And so Come As You Are had some unique challenges to it. One, because you are also talking about a system that has been Frankenstein together, because it was set up one way and then changes were made as time progressed. It really would have been nice at some point if they had just gutted the whole system and started over instead of just changing out bigger pieces, because it needed that. And so, and then you're talking about volunteers, people who volunteers and have ideas, and their idea may sound, it may sound, haha, pun intended. But they might not be coming from the actual like understanding of the big picture, to where they're like, we should switch this out, or we should do this, or we should put this speaker here. And they don't really know. Maybe they just wanted to move it aesthetically. And so then you cause more problems sometimes. So anyway, all that to say, that, yes, she was probably, to me, since the guy that mentored me, the actual sound technician, she was just as good as he was. Like,
Yeah.
that's the level that she had gotten to herself. Like, she understood the acoustics, the dynamics. She understood the difference between, the sound you're getting from stage because the musicians want sound to the sound that's being given to the audience and how to balance those in that room so that the music that the musicians are listening to is not overpowering what the audience is listening to. Like, and vice versa, or whatever. Like, there were always so many challenges that I don't think needed to be there. And I feel like that was the best it had been while she was taking over it.
Yeah.
Since the actual sound technician who was like a magician when it came to sound.
So by the time I get up there, like you were saying, like there's volunteers. So you'll have a handful of volunteers. There's one guy who, by his own admittance, is going deaf, but is still doing sound. He was not good. Like
No.
the worship team on stage.
You know what's funny?
So mad.
I'm comfortable saying that the sound was garbage and I hated every time that he was up in the sound booth. Like, I would just dread, especially if I was singing, like, okay, I'm going to be my prima donna self, whatever. But I would just be, I would be like, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. Like, it was awful. It was awful. It was awful. But he's also the type of person who's like, I'm God's gift to the soundboard, you know?
Well, and even like, so I had been in the sound booth for, like 2 weeks at that point, and I'm just shoved up there, right? And so I go up there and I'm very much like, look, I'm not here to take anyone's, I don't want a pissing match. And I mean, this guy and Tom would get into like knockdown, like screaming at each other. Tom would be on stage like during practice, and this guy would be in the sound booth and they're screaming at each other.
Yeah.
Right? And so like me and the new guy are like, this is intense. I'd never been to a worship practice before. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So I kind of like sit and just watch for a couple weeks. And I get, I'm like, okay, I'm going to start like watching YouTube videos and trying to learn what it is I'm supposed to be in charge of up here, right? I am not kidding. I was up there for maybe 2 weeks. And Tom gives my phone number to the sound booth guy, because he is upset. And, when Beth Moore was here, I kept telling her we need to do this and this. So now we need to do this. I'm just going to come in and do this. And so I'm like, oh, okay.
When I
like,
said people who had no business trying to change stuff.
Yeah.
This is what would happen. And Beth Moore had a rein on that. She was like, no. Yes, there's a million ways to skin a cat, but this is how we skin the cat.
Yeah, I know nothing, right? Like, I am the person at worship practice. Everyone be like, oh, that was terrible. Let's fix this. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Sounded pretty good to me. I don't I'm not a big worship person. Half the time I wasn't even in the room on a Sunday morning for worship, and so I am not in any way qualified to be the one to be in charge. The only reason I was, first of all, I'm on timeout. So if we can give Amanda something to do to fill her time, she'll stop painting the office and stop rearranging furniture. And 2, I proved that I would have Tom's back. I proved it with Young Gun. I proved it with Beth Moore. So Tom had another person in the room who would have his back in the midst of a worship team that was very divided.
Right. And who didn't know any better. And that's exactly like the key strategy there, is because Beth Moore had a rein on it all, and she cared about the ambiance. She cared about the sound. She cared about the atmosphere,
the lighting,
the atmosphere. Like, she was creating this environment for worship by leading, in the sound booth, and she did it very well. So now you're on Team Tom and you don't really know what you're doing, so that he can bulldoze and steamroll and do whatever the hell he wants to do and get his way on a worship team that is dividing, because the people that he told me I had to go talk to their pastor are the leaders of the worship team. So now he's not even the pastor of the leaders of the worship team in this little feud between him and Young Gun. Young Gun's their pastor. The worship style on Thursday is what all of these soft-hearted people want, this manipulation. That's not what we're doing on Sundays. Like, the divide, it's so crazy because Tom was so invested into the worship team. And we've talked about that before. We've mentioned we were a worship-focused church because that was what Tom did. He led worship, played on the worship team, and then preached, the Tom show. So, and we did what Tom wanted and only what Tom wanted. And if it wasn't what Tom wanted, there was an argument. And the times that Tom didn't get what he wanted were very few and far between, because usually the way it would go on the worship team is, it would be going along just fine and everybody would be going just fine, but Tom would be left out.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't understand. That's not the way we do it. You guys aren't doing it the way we practiced it all week. Okay, well, let's do it this way. Well, I can't. Okay, well, then I guess we're going to do it your way. Those were legitimate conversations that we had on the worship team. And then he could never figure out why it was never good enough for him. And it's like, because you're taking the fun and the free flow out of it. Like, you're taking the worship out of now it's just a mechanical, robotic playing music. And who wants to do, that's not music. Like, if the song is feeling a certain way, it needs to go a certain way. Like, there are ways to make that happen. And that's what people do.
So everyone I talk to of like, what do I need to do up here? Like, what do you need from me? Like, do you just want me to leave you guys the hell alone and I just like make sure there's someone here and I do the schedule? Like, what do you want from me? Right. And everyone I talk to is throwing all of these things at, like, the guy is calling me saying, we need to change this. Right. And I'm like, oh, okay. And it ends up causing a huge blow up. He starts changing stuff on the soundboard. And Tom loses his mind. And part of the reason why Tom loses his mind is the same reason why Tom would lose his mind when the worship team would change a chord, is because Tom only knows how to use the soundboard to push the buttons in a specific way.
And I will agree with that to some level, because these soundboards these days have like all these different layers to them. And so, like, soundboards used to be like, you're setting it up for this one-time usage and you start from scratch and you start all over every single time you do something. But these newer like soundboards, like, you program layers upon layers upon layers of information into them, and you're running things behind the scenes. And so that way, your person who comes up to do sound, who mixes your sound mixer, who's like in the moment, or like if you had a guest, like, this person doesn't have to go below layer 1. They can be like, mix the drums with the bass and the vocals and guitar, right? Like, they're working on layer 1, but there's layers underneath for that building, like things that are set almost like, I would relate it to like for somebody who didn't understand sound, almost like it's like there's governances. So like in a car, when your car is a governor and you can't go above 65, right? Like the engine will stall out.
Yeah.
And like somebody came in and mixed the big picture sound and all the different like the amps and the subwoofers and all of that is all mixed in a layer underneath so that even if you're mixing sound, you're not actually messing up like the big picture sound, I guess, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Trying to simplify that. So this guy went in and started messing in layers he shouldn't have been touching. Like,
Yeah.
Beth Moore, Tom, people that had done the research and knew what they were doing and had figured out what the best setting was. 21, that's the number, right? He went in and made it 18 on some things and maybe 24 on some other things and like literally was messing with stuff that shouldn't have been messed with.
Yeah.
And then that system, because it was hodgepodge together, it would throw fits. It would be like, I'm not going to work today. Or if you didn't do this, or it would be like, we don't know. And then you have the computer side of it.
Yeah. So like, I mean, you're right. You would have to turn things on and off in a specific order. Beth Moore, like, bless her. She could have told me to just go pound sand when I called her. Like, just like, he messed stuff up. I don't know what he did. And she came in and she helped me fix it.
Yeah.
This new guy in the sound booth, we're gonna call him Chimney, like after the character on 911, because he's super smart. He knows his stuff. He's funny. He's very personable. He's kind. He's married to a woman who's kind of a badass in her own right, like, and so, I start really relying heavily on him. So Chimney and I are like trying to figure this out. He knows stuff, right? But he's never worked with something that's hodgepodge together. He's only worked with stuff that was
like I said,
built that way from
a gutted it and started it from scratch.
So him and I decide everything's effed up anyway. We're going to go through. We're going to pull out all of these old RCA cords and all of this stuff. We're going to get rid of it all and clean up the cords. We're going to label all the cords, right? Then we have Beth Moore and Chimney and I work together and we finally get the soundboard to where other people can somewhat figure it out, right? I'm terrified to touch it, right? Like, because I've watched this guy touch it and he's been up there for years and he screwed everything up. And so I am terrified to touch it. But Tom is like, you're the leader. So if you're up there, like, just turn up the volume, just push the volume up a little bit. So I'm like, I don't know. Or like to even like switch over a mic, like turn this mic off and turn this mic on. I'm scared to death to touch something that I'm going to do something wrong, right? So I put stickers on the soundboard of like, this is what you push, right? We get everything all streamlined and everything. By this point, I have watched probably 40 hours. Like, seriously, 2 weeks of my job in the office, I spent the whole time watching YouTube videos trying to figure out how to do a sound booth. Because I had no idea.
Yeah.
And how everything worked together, how to get audio from the soundboard into, because not only are we dealing with what's in the room with us in the moment, but we're streaming it too. And those are two separate audio feeds that are going through. And so I am killing myself trying to learn as much as I can. And finally, Tom decides that I shouldn't have to do the soundboard. And I'm like, you think? And I mean, it's probably a solid month of me just fighting for my life, right? And finally, he's like, you shouldn't have to do the soundboard. I think we should, everything like the streaming and the slides that we put up on the projector, during service, that's you. But the soundboard, we're going to put Schroeder in charge of that.
Mm-hmm.
He's on the worship team. He's in a band.
He's got a good ear for it.
Yep, he's got a good ear for it. He's very knowledgeable.
He's got enough knowledge of how to do it.
Yep.
Just enough.
Schroeder's going to do this. You're going to do this. But I mean, it's still hodgepodge together. I mean, we had stuff like someone came in for a funeral, and even though we said we are a fully digital sound booth, so if you come in, if you have music or whatever, you need to have it on a playlist or a jump drive or something like that, right? So even though we had said all of that, they come in and they have a CD. They had burned a CD with the music. And it's me and Brandy running the sound booth that day. I was told all you got to do is just, play their music, turn on the microphone for the pastor. I can do that. I have my stickers, saying push this button, then push this button, then push this button, right? So we have no CD player in the sound booth. So do you want to know what my brilliant mind came up with?
Oh no, what?
In the moment, because we're like 4 minutes from this funeral starting and we need music, I send Brandy to a children's ministry classroom and she brings me a boombox covered in VeggieTale stickers. And we play the CD in that, and I hold a microphone up to the speakers on the boombox. That was my solution. This proves that I should not have been put up there.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is how it's done.
I should not have been up there, right?
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So all of this stuff goes on, and we're trying to pick up the pieces from Beth Moore leaving.
Mm-hmm. There was big fallout from that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like ripple effects through ministries.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's just like you or I. I mean, like we had our hand in so many ministries, women's ministry, youth ministry. Like, I mean, there was a ripple effect.
Yeah.
That just went through the whole church when she left.
Yeah.
And
you know what though? Like the timing of it and everything, like I'm not saying it was, I don't want to give Tom that much credit for being that mastermind, but like you've got a huge division scandal on your hands, and how appropriately timed that one of the biggest names at the church leaves and takes all the attention off of your great divide. Is that intentional? I don't want to give him that much credit, but I mean, goodness gracious. Like, yeah, did he push back at everything that was being pushed at him from Beth Moore, and did he finally come to a place of like, the collateral damage from you leaving is worth it for you to be out of my hair? And look at that, a scandal to replace my scandal. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like,
and the amount of stuff that she knew behind the scenes,
yeah.
Like, I don't even think anyone even knows the amount of dirt that woman probably has.
Well, not only knows, has receipts on. Like that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think it was very strategically planned. But it kind of leaves me
strategically convenient that now all of a sudden, like, this division in the church is swept under the carpet because now we get to focus on Beth Moore and what a tragedy that she had to leave,
Yeah. But so last week's Patreon, we kind of talk a little bit about some information about Tom and the church. So I really highly suggest going and listening to that. This week's Patreon, we're going to dive a little bit into this idea of like people being put into positions that they had no right being put into. And this idea of it's more of playing politics than actually caring about people's gifting and caring about what is best for the church. But Beth Moore leaving kind of puts me in a little bind, because I have a conference coming up, and she was going to do my sound. And she just left.
She just left. Burning Butterflies is a listener-supported podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by our amazing supporters on Patreon.
Follow the link in our show notes to learn how you can become a Patreon supporter too. Supporters get exclusive access to bonus content each month, including outtakes, cut content, and supporter-only episodes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on your listening platform.
Burning Butterflies is a production of Asha Media. Thank you for listening.